We're going to talk about really some real life application to what goes on with people that we see and that everyone on the panel sees. With me here is Denise Figueroa. She's from the Independent Living Center of the Hudson Valley. Frank Hemming, who's a senior associate in our office. Frank, this will be graded, so please act accordingly. Susan Vail from EverHome. And Sarah Szewczyk from NYSARC. Frank, you have to work on a fan club for next year, okay? All right, okay. So just to give some background, this is our case study. These are people that we typically see on a daily basis. Robert and Nancy are 73 and 76. They live in East Greenbush. Robert's health is especially in decline. They're worried about their future. And just like every client except one I've ever had, they want to age in their home. So first question is, who's available in their family? Well, they have 2 children, okay? As we typically see in today's world, the children are not usually at retirement age when this is happening. They're not available. One of them may want to help out because they're not working full time, or there are lots of economic situations where mom and dad end up employing a child, but we'll get to that. But more often than not, they're working, they have their own children, they have very little bandwidth to be actual caregivers in their parents' lives, unfortunately. So what do the Smiths have? They have about $5,500 in income, some of that coming from an IRA, which is important, as Frank will discuss. Okay, that's Robert's income, sorry. And Nancy has lower income. It's not uncommon for us to see disparate incomes for spouses. Less and less of that, and more of the wife or whoever having more income. That's been improved. When I first started in this practice, it was not uncommon to see a housewife who unfortunately only had $800 worth of income, and that really bad planning had been done. That has changed for the better. They have a home. They have a fairly large IRA. They have some life insurance, which has cash value, which in our world is what matters. They have some cash. They have 1 car. Okay, so they have some fairly significant means, but that doesn't mean that Medicaid is not available to them. What do they have for documents? So this becomes more critical in my world, whether there is in fact a power of attorney and a healthcare proxy. We're not going to get deep into the weeds on that, but when they don't, we have to go to court and get someone appointed their guardian, which is a much more lengthy and expensive process, and maybe a lot of disagreement, may end up with someone being the agent for this person that they never would have intended. So these very basic documents are critically important. The power of attorney is sometimes overlooked and done sloppily, basic, I would say. I mean, it's not looked at, provisions are not identified that need to be executed, whether that be gifting provisions or you can still cherry pick which powers you want to give somebody as your agent. Whenever I've seen someone give their person some powers and not others, it's always the powers they didn't give them that we needed. So I encourage everyone that if you're appointing an agent, 1, to pick a trustworthy person, and then 2, if they are in fact trustworthy, to give them the blanket authority that they're going to need to act on your behalf. This person also has a will, so when they do in fact move on, there will be a way for the assets to be split. Maybe it's all to their spouse, maybe it's not, maybe it's charity, whatever. They don't have a MULST, which we encourage all of our clients to get, because there may be decisions that their agent may not know what their wishes are, and they do not have a trust. So we're going to talk about why it would be advantageous in this situation to have a trust. What's going on with Robert's health? He has Parkinson's disease. He has some short-term memory loss. He has COPD, and he has heart disease. Nancy's doing better, but as typically is the case, she's exhausted. So we see this a lot. Most spouses don't want to institutionalize their spouse. Occasionally they do, and we understand that, and we can assist with that too, but more typically they want to keep them in the home. And Nancy has been working very hard to do that. As we said, their children are not very available for this for assistance with this. So she has stressed herself physically and mentally to do this, and she just can't really do it anymore. So the families reached out to us. They had hired a neighbor and they paid them, as we say, under the table or maybe in that gray world. Lots of issues with that, but they've heard about Medicaid and now they really need to see what they can do. So from a physical medical qualification standpoint, I'm going to turn it over to Susan.
On? Oh, there we go. Thank you. So in this case scenario, I have Nancy and her daughter Patricia contacted us because, as the slide said, they called a home care agency. Surprise, surprise, no home care. They have resorted to hiring a neighbor under the table, and I know other presenters have talked about that risk, and I'm gonna go a little bit more into that in a little bit. So as a life care coordinator, I'm also a member of the Aging Life Care Association. We are able to look at the whole picture. And as our slide shows here, families see this fork in the road and want to run the other way. With a care coordinator or care manager, we can guide and navigate. Do we have care people in our back pocket? No, but we can help guide them and navigate and advocate for them. I'm going to jump to some of the key information. We did go over this. When I met with Nancy and her daughter, we talked about the importance of the medical order for life-sustaining treatment the most. In my prior life, I was a hospital discharge planner and rehab social worker. So many times we would be sitting with families and they didn't know what their loved ones' wishes were. And then they're battling, well, I know dad wouldn't want this, but mom wants this and I want this, and it was a mess. It's very simple. And what's happened over the past couple of years is now the doctors can bill for discussing the most with their patients. So if a doctor doesn't want to, push it. You can, they have to do it if a client wants it. Now, some people you may know, may have the non-hospital DNR. And that's okay to have, but it's very limited because the most will go into, do you want IV therapy? Do you want to go to the hospital? Do you want comfort measures? Under certain circumstances, what do you want your treatment to be? And this is key for the Smith family, especially with Robert's Parkinson's. And most people, if you think of Parkinson's, even when I was younger, oh, that's the person who shakes a lot. One thing my clients have taught me is I have 3 clients with Parkinson's who started with memory issues, no other physical signs. And this is hard for families because they don't understand, and there's so many limited resources. In our study, Patricia has been doing, Nancy has been doing everything she can, but she can't do it. Patricia really wants to help, but she can't. And she's starting to have her own issues, including the beginning of arthritis, which is decreasing her ability to help him. And then there's Doug, the local son, also, who doesn't want the hands-on. He can't stand that, but he wants to be involved. So we look at the different options that we can put in place for them. So in this scenario, I did a comprehensive assessment and care plan. I went out to their home. I looked at everything from, can they get in and out of the house? Do they have what they need? Are there grab bars? Do they have a seat in the shower? All those things. We just kind of look in what's the best thing. I talked to them to find out what they want. As Aaron said, there's only been one client he's had that there's one client who wanted to go to a nursing home as their life plan. Other than that, everyone wants to stay home. So how are we going to do this? But also planning that if there's a situation or a medical condition where you're not able to be maintained in the home, what are your choices? What are your likes? What are your dislikes? Looking at that. And we talk about the paying privately of the neighbor. The risk of that is so much, and we could do a whole presentation on that. especially if that worker, we talked about the Social Security, we talked about workman's comp. But as a family member, you can be sued. The person can be sued. So it's not worth the risk. And if you partner with a life care coordinator, we can help guide the Smith family through, okay, how's this look? Let's look at whether or not you hired someone on care.com, whether you use a thing as home pay, which handles all that, or there are other household payroll companies. And it's worth the investment if you balance certain amount a month for payroll for your household employee, AKA your aide, or a lawsuit and workman's comp claims that you have no workman's comp. It really boils down to that. We talked about definitely consulting with the law firm. In their case, it was Pierro, Connor, and Strauss. And making sure, even though they have that healthcare proxy and power of attorney, are they up to date? I just recently had a client who did their healthcare proxy and power of attorney in the 1980s. I'm going, yeah, you need to review those, because it was someone, and I know even on the news or the TV, I've been seeing, hey, do your care planning documents, do your will, do your healthcare proxy, do your power of attorney, just go to this website. And I'm going, that's probably not the best idea, but we're always looking for solutions. We talked about their financial concerns. Yes, they're quote unquote saving money by paying under the table, but that's not really saving money. We're going to talk to them about the different programs, whether it's Office of the Aging and ISEP or Medicaid, and how we're going to do that. They know eventually they're going to need Medicaid, and they're going to be starting the Medicaid process with the elder law firm. But there are so many different options, and now with all the changes, it's a little bit longer. And then the key part, which the previous panel touched upon, is the use of technology. We have seen that change so much for families and be able to allow them to age in place and be able to get the care, including telemedicine, including one of the pieces of the technology suite is a 17-inch touchscreen in the home, but the caregivers can document the care. So if I'm on a cruise or if I'm in another country, I can still talk. I can know what's going on, like I'm in the next room. And we look also at everything else. And as an aging life care coordinator, I heard the term expert. I always say, I don't think I'm the expert, but I have knowledge in all aspects, whether it's financial, legal, looking at what we need to do. And I did have a slide in consumer directed, but I'm not going to take Denise's thunder. So I'm not going to go over that. But in working with the Smiths, we really looked at what's going to work for them. For them, we've decided when they go to Medicaid, it's going to be the consumer directed program. And you can see the steps there. I will say, typical with things, I did the slides before the change. So where it says conflict free, it's the other one. Other than that, that's the brief part. And I will go on to the next person, which I think is you, Frank. All right, it's all you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. It's good to be back in person. I always love doing these because every one of my bosses is in this room. So whenever we get involved, right, if there's somebody else who gets yelled at other than the social worker, it's probably the attorney, because we typically aren't dealing with people when they're in crisis on their best day. We understand, right? It's a difficult situation, but usually there are things that we can do to help. So let's start talking about some of the things we can do. First, we want to look at some basics, right? What do they have? So in our example, they already have power of attorney, they have healthcare proxy. They probably don't have a disposition of remains appointment. It is a document that we do. Many other firms do not. It's just a document that says who can take care of your burial wishes and final arrangements after you've passed. We do love when people do the most, just because it gives that level of complexity that we typically don't put in a healthcare proxy, but that one's a little more optional. And it's not something that we do. That's something that you would speak with your doctor about, just like Sue talked about. They do have a will. That's a good start. That doesn't mean that we're through the woods though, just with what they've got. So what do we do? First, we have to look at the numbers, right? We have to look at what do they have and what do we have to do? So let's do some quick recap on eligibility. So to get Robert Medicaid eligible, we have to get his assets down below $16,800 by the first of the month. If we don't do that, he is ineligible. Then he doesn't get Medicaid, and we're stuck spinning the wheels, and they're going to be paying a lot of money for the care to come in to help him. That's not what we want. We don't have to do that, so let's not. So first thing we do is we talk about their home. Right? We talk about their home because that's their biggest asset. We want to protect that. So to protect that, we're going to talk about doing a trust in a second, but let's just talk about a few other things with the home. It is technically an exempt asset as long as he or Nancy resides in it. That's important. We don't have to do anything with it for an eligibility standpoint, but that doesn't mean that we don't want to do anything with it, because if you talk to any attorney that does this type of work, one thing we have to be concerned about is not only getting them eligible, but we always want to make sure that when someone passes, Medicaid doesn't reclaim against their estate for what they've had, for what we worked so hard to keep away from the bad people. So if we put it in a trust or we do anything or a life estate or some other options, we can keep the house not only protected, but we can also keep it away from the state after we've had someone pass away. In other limited circumstances, there are some other transfer exemptions. Caregiver child's usually the one that we use the most, that people generally have heard of if there's something that doesn't involve a trust. If you have someone in a nursing home, we can do something called an intent to return home document, which will at least extend the time before the county likely will place a lien on the home. Not something we like to deal with, but obviously certainly has come up in the past. And the one thing that I did want to point out with the home, we usually do not have this issue, especially up in the upstate region, but there is a home equity limit on it being an exempt asset. That limit for 2022 is $955,000. If you have a home or a residence worth more than that, even if it's in your own name, it doesn't matter whether your spouse or you are in it, you're automatically ineligible. And either you have to move it to a trust or you have to spend down your home equity. But again, let's not spend a lot of time on that because we just don't see that situation very much. There are some other things that we don't have to do anything with. There are other exemptions. Robert can have $16,800 or less of cash value of life insurance, whatever is a countable asset for Medicaid. So he doesn't have to be penniless. He just has to be very close. We can prepay burials for Robert, Nancy, the kids, my favorite, the in-laws, weirdly enough, right? So if you don't like your daughter-in-law, you can at least pay for her burial. I just don't want to know why she might need it a little sooner, okay? If we have the weird scenario, not something we see very often, if you happen to own a business and then you are in need of long-term care, if you have an income producing property like a business, it technically is an exempt asset. That doesn't mean there aren't income considerations. You can have $1,500 or less face value of life insurance. Congratulations, that's what it used to cost to bury you in 1965. I'm sure the prices haven't gone up. Wait, isn't that what Dan was saying was basically what Tricken's going for?
I think that's correct.
Okay. Big one, biggest one that we see a lot that people don't know about is your IRA. If you have an IRA, 401, 403B, something that's a tax deferred retirement funds, if it's in payment status, it is an exempt asset. Do not spend down your retirement funds without talking to us. I literally had a conversation with a family yesterday. Mom is 62. She has, unfortunately, a not very good diagnosis. She needs care now. She has a $200,000 deferred comp. We're going to put that in payment status this week. We're going to apply for her for Medicaid next month. They shouldn't have to spend that asset down unless the county wants to fight us about it. So do not spend that type of money down without talking to counsel first, because typically you don't have to. They can also have one car regardless of value. I know it doesn't make any sense. This is whether you're at home or in a nursing home. You could have the Lamborghini that you can see outside your window. They can't take it from you. Everything else typically is not exempt. So what do? We move things to the trust that we're going to talk about in a second, and we're going to get Robert down on Medicaid. Now, one of the nice things about COVID, and I'm going to be very careful how I word this. Hopefully I do a good job. One of the nice things about COVID is, and I think Valerie mentioned this morning, they cannot treat people more harshly during the public health emergency. So even though they try to put a look back period on home care in 2020, they haven't been able to enforce those rules because of COVID. So for now, possibly until the end of the year, based on the information Valerie gave this morning, there's still no look back for home care. So we can do whatever we want with the assets and get Robert on Medicaid ASAP, including moving things to a trust, moving things to the wife, moving things to the kids, whatever we think is most appropriate. So just want to be clear on that. If we get into next year, they take the public health emergency away, this plan changes, we're going to have to do a lot more different things that are much closer to what we currently have to do for a nursing home situation, because then we're going to be dealing with a look back period. So we would fund the trust with the house, and we would probably put in that life insurance policy that he has, because there's really no point not to do that. The cash we're going to leave alone, we're just going to reorient it. We have to have Robert have less than $16,800. So let's say we leave him with $10,000. The other $40,000, that's just going to sit in an account just with Nancy. Congratulations, he's now Medicaid eligible because his retirement account, given that he's over 72, is already in periodic payment status. And we don't have any look backs or waiting periods for any of that. We also want to talk about doing things to protect his income. That will involve a pooled trust. I promised Sarah I would not take this from her, so she's going to talk to you all about that in just a little bit. So there's more to come about how we protect his income. About the trust, it always sounds scary. Hopefully it's not nearly as scary once you hear a little bit about it. It's an irrevocable trust in its name only. The way that we draft it, you can revoke a trust even though it says it's irrevocable, mainly because we're lawyers, but actually because the law says that we can, as long as it's drafted properly. You can put assets in, typically allow income out of it. You can change your beneficiaries at any time. You can change your trustees at any time. And as I've already said, you can blow it up if you hated it the day after you did it. That's typically the plan that we try to put in place for most people if you get out in front of this, or if we don't have a look back situation. So you pick one of the kids or both, depending on what your relationship is with them. You put them in charge of the trust. If they don't do what you want, you fire them. You can get money out of the trust and you protect all your assets that are in the trust. That's the very quick version of the plan. We've been doing it for a very long time. We'll continue to do it until we can't. Trying to think if there's anything else I want to talk about. I think the only thing else that I want to add is the trust not only protects things now, it also makes things nice and easy when you die and keeps your family out of probate. So our firm does a lot of work with probate, unfortunately. So let's talk about that for just 30 seconds. Probate means that you died with something in just your name alone, no beneficiaries named, no co-owners named. And if you are in that situation, your family has to go to court to deal with it. Now, because of the pandemic and for many other reasons, courts were never a fun place before. They're certainly not a fun place to go now. I'm going to use my own family as an example here. My wife's grandfather died just about 3 years ago. All right. The only reason we had to do anything with his will was because, wouldn't you know it, the IRS tried to send him a check after he had passed away, and no one had the authority to deal with the check for $2,500. It took us 3 years to get through that estate for $2,500 through Saratoga County. And it's not because Saratoga County wasn't fine to deal with, it was the IRS. So if you can keep everybody out of court, you're going to want to do that. A trust is a really good way to do that. A Medicaid trust is a really good way to do that, and you can still protect everything that you've had as long as you get it set up properly. The only other thing that I want to say is if we have time, there are some new things that we've been hearing about this enrollment process with this new independent assessor. Valerie started to touch on some of them. I don't want to take any more time for the other panelists, but we do have things to say if we have time to talk about that, because it's not great. So here you go, Sarah.
Thank you, Frank. And thank you to everybody at Pierro, Connor, and Strauss for putting on this wonderful event every year and having us here on the panel. So as we've been talking about, we're trying to help the Smiths get Robert some care and help them qualify financially for benefits. And we know that so many people are told that they cannot qualify for these services. And we're here today to talk about how it's possible. So we've been able to now spend down his assets and make it so that he's eligible from that standpoint. But as we saw earlier, he's got pretty significant monthly income each month as well. So we're going to be talking about how he can use a pooled trust to protect that income and be able to put it towards his monthly expenses every month so that he doesn't have to impoverish himself in order to get access to the care that he needs. Now, a pooled supplemental needs trust is a special type of irrevocable trust. And again, irrevocable only in the name for the protection of his benefits. This is a little bit unique in that it's managed by a nonprofit organization, and the nonprofit agrees to manage this money on behalf of the person who is in need of the Medicaid services. This allows that person to get qualified for Medicaid home care and many other means-tested government benefit programs. They're able to protect the excess money that they have so that they can use that for their living expenses and non-medical purchases, things that are going to enable them to live in the community and be able to afford to pay their bills. A lot of people ask us if this is legal. How is this legal? What if Medicaid finds out? They're gonna find out, we're gonna tell them, and we're gonna submit the paperwork to Medicaid. We need to inform them that they're gonna be using a trust to pay the spend down. So this is allowable both under federal and state statute. The individual must have a qualifying disability. Now, typically someone who's in need of home care services is going to be someone who has some sort of chronic condition that would qualify them to use this program. They may just need to do a little bit of extra paperwork when they submit their Medicaid application. And this is going to afford them the money to be able to continue to pay their monthly living expenses and make purchases that will improve their quality of life, improve their care situation, the comfort of their home. And really the main goal is to just help keep them at home as long as possible, allow them to age in the community among their family and loved ones. There's a lot of benefits to using a pooled trust. Obviously, first and foremost, it's primarily to help a person become financially eligible for these services and maintain their ongoing eligibility. Doing so without a complete loss of their income, which they need in order to pay their expenses and stay at home. If we were giving all this money up to Medicaid, they would all be in nursing homes because no one could afford their bills. So it also helps to supplement the care that's being provided. We can not only help pay their rent, mortgage, their monthly expenses, we can pay for uncovered medical costs, talk about some of the technology that may be used to help enhance a person's care. Those are things that can be paid for out of the money that's going into the trust. Getting access to these services is going to help offset the costs of co-pays that they may be being charged. They're going to have access to more services that aren't covered under their Medicare benefits, things like long-term care. And so that they can get this care, therapy services in the comfort of their own home, giving people an alternative to a nursing home placement. And we talk about the caregivers as well. I think it's so important. We all know how much it can be on a caregiver to manage this process, not only on the time it takes, maybe they're providing unpaid care while they're trying to work, maybe they're giving up working in order to care for a loved one, maybe they're, in Doug's case, contributing financially towards the cost of that care. So it helps not only protect the individual and the applicant, but also improve the situation for the caregiver, give them some support. They can get respite, so they can go on a vacation and actually enjoy some time and know that mom or dad is cared for when they're not there. So switching over here to the income limits. So as we talked about, we now need to get Robert down below the income limits. And these are calculated on a monthly basis. So as we saw, his monthly income is quite high. He worked hard, he had a couple great pensions, and he's got a pretty significant monthly income. And if any of you are looking at these limits and saying, wow, that's not a lot of money, it's not. Now, good news, as Val mentioned earlier, these income limits are going up. So this is going to help a number of people in that low income bracket who maybe have a $300 to $600 a month spend down. They may not need a pooled trust in the future, which is good news. But the Medicaid does allow income that is received by the individual and placed into a supplemental needs trust in the same month would be disregarded for their Medicaid eligibility purposes. Now, it's very important that we point out in the same month. This is a month-to-month program. Each month, they're going to be depositing the amount of the income that is above this individual income limit. Now, it's going to be from many sources: Social Security disability, pensions, the money that's coming out of his IRA. That distribution is going to be counted towards his monthly income, alimony payments. So all of those sources of income, Medicaid's going to add up his total monthly income, and the amount that he is above that limit is what's going to go into the pooled trust. So taking a look at Robert's income here, and please keep in mind, Medicaid does this calculation. It is not done by the pooled trust. We do not tell anyone how much money they're supposed to put into the account. And this can be much more complicated in that some people are eligible for different deductions. So this is a very simplified version of this calculation. We're going to take his total monthly income, deduct the amount he's allowed to keep. That's the money he has in his account that he will continue to be able to use. The rest is what is going to need to go into the pooled trust. This is important to point out. Their income does not all of a sudden all go to a pooled trust and be managed by a pooled trust. It is just the amount that's over the limit. They're still going to get it the way they get it now. And then they'll be responsible for putting the little over $4,600 a month into the trust each month. And there's a variety of ways to do that. After the monthly administrative fee for the trust, the cost of the services is taken out, Robert will have a little over $4,300 in his trust account each month that he can use to pay his bills and other expenses. So there's a couple rules about how the money can be used. The first and most important is that it must be for Robert's primary benefit. We can't buy gifts for other people with the money. It needs to be put towards his bills, services, and items that are for his benefit. We also have to use the funds to supplement government benefits. So we can't pay for things Medicaid's supposed to be providing, but we can pay for additional services, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Requests do require documentation. It's still that person's responsibility to tell us what they want to use the money for, send us some requests with some associated documentation like an invoice, a receipt, a bill for a service being provided, and then we pay a third party. We can never give money back to Robert or Nancy or put money into their bank account. That would make that money available to them. They would no longer be eligible for Medicaid, right? So we'll talk about ways that they can, be more flexible. We cannot give them cash or give them money in their account. And under the federal regulation, this trust account will close upon Robert's death. And anything that is in that account will either go to repay Medicaid or be retained by the pooled trust to support other people with disabilities that are served by their nonprofit. So it's very important that the family is using the money every month, sending in receipts when bills are due so that they do not leave a balance in the trust. The process here, we gave you a little bit of graphic. There's many ways to make deposits into the trust. You can send a paper check if you want, but the best is to set up electronic deposits of the monthly income going in. So Robert's gonna do that. We'll take the funds out of his bank account a day or so after he receives it, and then he'll submit requests to pay for his expenses. And those can be done for one-time payments that may fluctuate from month to month, or we can also set up certain things to be paid automatically. And then the pooled trust will pay that out to the third-party vendor. There's a couple different types of disbursement requests. Typically, we're paying for a bill to a third party directly. We can also reimburse an individual who purchases something for Robert. So Doug or Patricia goes out, buys groceries for them, keeps the receipts, sends it to us, we repay them for that purchase. Using a credit card is another great way to have flexibility to go out and do your spending, send us the credit card statement, we pay the credit card company. In that way, the credit card company is the third party, right? We cannot, if they go out and buy groceries with cash or buy it with a debit card, we're not gonna be able to reimburse them. But don't worry, call the trust. There's always gonna be another bill that they paid that we can pay so that they can free up that cash for that. Sometimes we're also looking at things like home modifications or landscaping, larger purchases. Those things, they might want to go get a quote or an invoice, send it to the trust. We'll pre-approve it before we actually pay for that type of service. So those are just some examples, some of the different types of requests. Next slide, we're just talking about examples of what we can pay for. It's mainly going to be monthly living expenses. And so I'd love to jump to the next slide where we talk about how Robert is going to be using his money. So we've got about $4,600 in the trust each month of his approximate balance. And so looking at this, this is a pretty significant amount of money. As we mentioned, they've already paid off their house. Usually the first thing we look at is, do you have rent or mortgage? We can pay that automatically every month. That helps take care of a lot of the extra paperwork for the family. Well, they don't have a mortgage. So we're going to be looking at being a little bit more creative with ways we can use the money. And as we talked about, they were paying an aid under the table. So we're going to look at trying to help get that person on the books so we can pay for those additional hours that Medicaid didn't authorize. Some care will be provided through CDPAP program, as Susan mentioned, and then we can now pay for some additional care as well. Now, we cannot pay them under the table. The trust cannot pay them directly. We would essentially be that person's employer, and that can't happen. So what we're going to do is we're we're going to look at other options. Can we hire someone through an agency? That's the easiest. They send us an invoice, we pay the agency pays the aide, right? In this situation, they're going to use a payroll company. A little bit of an extra cost, but totally worth the protections of not getting sued. And so those payments will be processed, take a pretty good chunk of the spend down. Beyond that, we're going to take their electric bill, their cable bill, things that they can always go get another copy of. I always recommend those are the types of bills that you want to send to the trust. We pay those directly to the vendor. Now, after that, we've got a little over $1,000 still left for them to use. Now, not everybody has enough expenses every month to spend down everything that they have. And sometimes they might have unexpected things come up, or they have property taxes that are going to be due in the future. So they want to reserve that money. And under the current rules, they're able to do that. If they don't spend all of the money in a given month, the next month they make their next deposit, and it just adds to that balance. So we're going to actually reserve about $1,000 a month so that they can pay their quarterly taxes. Then there's still going to be about $40 left, and that'll be available to them for things that they need throughout the month. They can let it build up and use it for a future expense. Now, how would this look under the new rules? So in the next slide, we talk about how this would be impacted and the new potential community look back, which we're still waiting to see what happens, and we don't have any official regulations. But at this time, we're looking at the Smiths having a little over $1,000 left each month that they need to spend in the trust. And this is something that could be used for their everyday living expenses, to save up for if the boiler breaks, if something happens to the roof. So they have money available for those types of expenses, and to pay those quarterly property taxes that we cannot pay monthly. With the new community look back rules, transfers to a trust can also be considered a transfer for eligibility purposes. And so it's likely and possible that the Medicaid recipient will be required to spend down their entire monthly deposit within that month, which would leave the Smiths unable to pay their property taxes, unable to save up for those future expenses. So those are some of the things that we are all advocating for with the state, and helping them to understand how these rules will impact the people that we serve. This would require Robert to have to spend all $4,300 every single month. So we'll stay tuned for more information on that. And I'll turn things over to Denise. Now that we've gotten Robert eligible, we're going to talk about what services he's going to get and how to apply for those benefits.
Thank you. I realize I'm the last person between here and the door, so I'll try to make this less painful. Anyway, before I start talking about how we're going to apply, how we're going to assist Robert and his family with the consumer-directed personal assistance program, I thought I'd at least let folks know a little bit about what the Independent Living Center is and what we do. We are a disability-led organization. That means our board of directors and our majority of our staff are people with disabilities. And we promote self-determination and integration in the community. So the Consumer-Directed Personal Assistance Program is something that really was born out of the disability rights movement. And we very very strongly believe that it needs to be a part, and a very strong part, of long-term care services. So the center, in addition to being a fiscal intermediary, we do individual and systems advocacy and peer counseling, independent living skills training, information and referral. We have a huge New York Connects program that actually covers 19 counties in this state, providing information and assistance for people with disabilities, as well as seniors. We don't make a distinction. And we provide a lot of benefits advisement. We help people transition out of nursing homes. And we provide veteran-directed care, which is very similar to CDPAP, as well as many other support services, as I said, equipment loan programs, et cetera. So we provide a whole variety of services that can help support people in addition to consumer-directed personal assistance. But let's talk about Robert and his family. And so he's now eligible for Medicaid due to all the work that's been done here. And so we can talk about how this is going to translate. As we've already said, Robert, the reason this is really beneficial for this family is they've already identified a person in the household who is willing to be the caregiver, the paid caregiver. And in the CDPAP model, you can hire any family member except for a spouse to provide your personal assistance services. So it can be a family member, it can be, a neighbor, a close neighbor. And in many of the rural communities, that's really important because it's very hard to get home care workers. But it also allows you to take control over who's coming in and out of your home. I think that a lot of people are afraid to use home care services because they don't know who these strange people are who are going to be coming into their home. They haven't met them before and they have no say in who comes to their home, because if you're going through a traditional agency, that person works for the agency, they don't work for you. And in the CDPAP model, you become the employer. So Patricia can earn money as the caregiver, and the son Doug, who can't provide that care, can serve as the designated representative who can help to manage the care. So he's going to take on that employer role that's really critical here. Again, the fiscal intermediary, we don't hire these folks. It actually is the consumer who hires the person. It's designed to keep people in the community and really take control of their lives. I've gone through some of the who can participate here. Sorry. Obviously, you have to be Medicaid eligible in order to get the service. You have to be eligible for home care services, personal care services, or private duty nursing. One of the unique things about consumer-directed personal assistance services is that you don't have to have somebody who's been certified to provide certain nursing care services. So people can help folks with catheterization. They can help with nursing tasks that would normally be required through a home care agency. So that is also some of the additional flexibility that allows people to be able to hire someone. You train the person on what needs to be done, or in this case, perhaps the son will be training on whatever needs to be done, whether it's medicine management, whatever the tasks are. You have to be self-directing or have a designated representative in order to do that, because as I said, you're the employer. So you recruit, you hire, you train, and you supervise as well as terminate whoever it is who works for you. Now, hopefully you're not terminating your daughter, but or your sister. It can happen, and it has happened. We've certainly seen it. But it does happen, absolutely. And, the other thing is, as I said, it can be too much for one person in the family. And at some point they may decide they actually need additional folks to do this work, because it's not easy work. So the fiscal intermediary's responsibility in this is to enroll and train consumers on their responsibilities in CDPA, to make sure that payroll is processed properly, and ensure that all the payroll liabilities are paid, that we're following all the New York State labor laws, et cetera. And in COVID, it's been very interesting implementing many of the COVID sick pay issues. And, there's been a lot of things that have changed in the last couple of years. Utilizing an electronic visit verification system, which was required of all programs, home care agencies, including consumer-directed personal assistance, that went into effect a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. Everybody had to have that in place. And so that is supposed to be to prevent Medicaid fraud. So what it does is it means that when the person is in the home, and it's very interesting when the person lives in the home, it's very hard to implement this, but when a home health aide comes to the house, they have to electronically log in, basically, either with a telephone or with a computer, et cetera, with an app, to prove that they actually were there in the house, and then they have to log out. So consumer and their designated rep need to be trained on how this whole process works, as well as the employees, because it can get very confusing and lots of mistakes can happen and payroll doesn't get processed. So we also need to help folks keep track of when the annual physicals are due, and pay for those annual physicals for the home care workers, and also monitor for additional issues like Medicaid fraud. So in Robert's case, obviously, once he's selected, and that's the other thing, you select your FI, your fiscal intermediary. It's not somebody, you're not forced to take one fiscal intermediary over another. There may be other services that provider has that you would like to be able to take advantage of. And so it is always the option of the consumer on who they use as a fiscal intermediary. And once they've selected the center, our center as the fiscal intermediary, we would then, help train Doug and his father on the consumer agreement. They'd sign a consumer agreement with the center, acknowledging their role and how the whole program works. We would help them and provide all the forms and everything that they would need to enroll staff, or in this case, the daughter, to serve as the caregiver. And in this case, because he's already got somebody identified, this process could be very quick. It's just a matter of getting the health assessment that is required, by Medicaid and by the Department of Health. Once that physical is done, this whole thing could really be set up in a week or two, because it really doesn't take very long if you already have identified somebody. The bigger problem is when you don't have somebody that you're bringing into the program, and then you've got to do the recruitment. And we will help you figure out where you can recruit, how you can recruit people, and help you through that training of how to interview people to be a personal assistant, because it's not always anything, we certainly don't know these things ahead of time. So we would be providing the training on the EVV system for Doug and for Patricia, who is the caregiver, for time tracking and payroll. And, it really would provide lots of flexibility for Robert and his family to be able to stay in his home and utilize consumer-directed personal assistance. The new DOH rules, everybody's talked about the concerns we all have about the impact that's going to have on consumers. For us, obviously, we worry about choice. From an independent living perspective, it's always about choice for the consumer and their family. And we are concerned that doctors who, know the family, know the disabilities, particular disability issues that might come up, are not going to be involved in this process. And what that means for the future, I'm not really sure, but I think it's going to certainly create a lot of barriers for people to be able to get access the services that they're going to need. So with that, I think what I'm going to do is turn this over to you.
Yeah, so I just want to say a couple of things. Even though the Medicaid rules are changing for next year and the asset limit is going up some and the income limit is going up some, these programs are not getting easier to access. So it becomes a harder and more of a struggle to get people in the right place. The CDPAP program that we've been talking about has become much more the program of choice, because we need to employ people that we know because there aren't other people available. And we are doing this obviously lots of times in tandem with using Medicaid to pay part of it and then private paying for more. And that kind of combination plan, I think, is more and more what we are going to be seeing in the future. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my partner to wrap it all up.
I want to thank you all for being part of the 27th Annual Elder Law Forum. It's been a great day. Give yourselves a hand for sticking with us all the way through to the end. Thank you so much. And I want to thank again Beth and Tim for putting on this event. What a marvelous job they have done to get this all together. All of our speakers, sponsors, and panelists. And we hope everyone at home enjoyed it. We hope you're still with us. And we hope to see you all next year.